John Calvin, the shocking truth about his silent life that haunts us today, in a world where silence often speaks louder than words, the enigma that shrouded John Calvin's life is downright chilling. Who was this man, revered and reviled, whose very presence stirred whispers of fear and admiration? Picture a cold evening in Geneva, where shadows danced along cobblestone streets and flickering lamplights barely pierced the darkness. Calvin, known for his austere demeanor, reportedly never laughed. His face, rigid like granite, held secrets deeper than the profound doctrines he preached. But what lay hidden behind that silence? A whispered rumor suggested that on stormy nights, the walls of his modest home echoed with the cries of lost souls. Was it guilt from decisions that altered the course of religion or something more sinister? Tales swirled about a ghostly figure seen slipping through the shadows of his study. He was said to have possessed ancient texts, books that glowed with an otherworldly light, a light that faded the moment a curious mind dared to take a closer look. Could these tomes unlock the dark secrets of the Reformation? As the moon cast eerie reflections, frost crept over the town's rooftops. Citizens clutched their cloaks tighter, casting sidelong glances at one another. What were they whispering about? Among the churchgoers, a chilling unease settled like a heavy fog. The tension was palpable. Were they talking about the midnight rituals that Calvin supposedly conducted, or the unexplainable disappearances that plagued the town? Something untold hung in the air, nudging every heart toward an unsettling curiosity. Hey, before we continue with this amazing story, I need to give you an important heads up. Many subscribers have reported that YouTube unsubscribed them without warning. Take a quick second to check the red button below to make sure you're still subscribed to the channel. I'd hate for you to miss any of the exclusive content coming soon. And while you're there, smash that like button, it really helps me out with the algorithm. Oh, and tell me in the comments, which city are you watching from? I love getting to know every amazing person who's part of this community. Your participation makes all the difference. Let's connect. In this haunted silence, Calvin's past began to unfurl like a dark tapestry woven with mistakes and shadows. Why did he shun laughter while wielding the power to change lives? The deeper one dove into his silent world, the more unsettling truths emerged. Witnesses claimed he would gaze into the abyss, as if contemplating revelations from another realm, an abyss that seemed to look back, hungry for a soul to claim. What secrets lay within that dark well of knowledge? And was John Calvin merely a humble preacher, or a man entwined with forces beyond comprehension? The night whispered promises of untold revelations waiting to be uncovered. What would the truth reveal? The air crackled with tension in Geneva, thick as the mist that clung to the streets. Shadows twisted and turned, casting figures that seemed to lurk just beyond the flickering lamplight. Calvin's presence loomed, a specter that stirred the souls of the restless townsfolk. On this particular night, the weight of unspoken fears hung heavy. Whispers darted like fireflies, illuminating the darkness with tales too shadowy to name. A tremor coursed through the city when the troop of city watchmen made their rounds, their boots echoing ominously against the cobblestones. Reports of sighting strange figures slipping from doorways, lost voices mingling with the wind had stirred the citizens into a frenzy. People locked doors and pulled shutters tight, hearts racing. Those who dared speak of the preacher's dark rituals were silenced with furtive glances filled with distrust. "Is it true," a young woman asked her friend, voice barely above a whisper, "that he speaks with the dead?" Her friend's eyes widened, rich with fear and intrigue. Calvin, shrouded in shadows, sat at his desk, the flickering candle casting dancing shapes across the room. The ancient texts lay open before him, their pages trembling as if alive. He traced his fingers over the faded script, and for a moment, time stood still. The ghosts of his past clamored for attention, each one a shard of regret. He could hear their cries beneath the silence, an undercurrent of anguish thrummed. On the periphery of town, an ominous figure watched the preacher, hidden among the trees. The silhouette was cloaked in darkness, eyes shimmering like a predator's under a moonless sky. What drove this watcher? A desire for revenge, knowledge, something else entirely? A chill snaked down the observer's spine, the very air charged with foreboding anticipation. As the clock struck midnight, a scream shattered the stillness, a piercing cry that echoed through the hearts of Genevans. Calvin's gaze snapped to the window, eyes sharp as daggers. He rushed outside, abandoning the glow of his lonely candle. The townsfolk stood frozen, faces pale, as if the night itself had drained their courage. "Please," it came from the graveyard, a man shouted, trembling. Calvin's blood ran cold as he moved toward the cemetery. His breaths came in sharp bursts, each one a reminder of the secrets he had buried deep, a past that refused to stay buried. Silently, he remembered the frenzied scribbles in the margins of his texts, the names of those he had condemned, the pain he had inflicted in the name of righteousness. With each step, the ground beneath his feet seemed to quiver, wrapped in dread. The town had wrestled with the enormity of his power, the lives lost to his conviction. What awaited him beneath the darkening sky? Would he confront his demons, or would they consume him? As the old stone walls of the cemetery came into view, an unnatural light began to pulse from the ground, a soft glow that beckoned him closer, an allure he could neither resist nor understand. It was the very texts that whispered promises of forbidden truths, now echoing through his mind, urging him forward. But what awaited him in that darkness? Driven by an insatiable urge to uncover the truth, the people of Geneva gathered, fear and disbelief etched into their faces. Calvin stood on the precipice of revelation, ready to unearth the buried horrors of his past, or face the same fate as those he had cast into shadows. What if the light held the key to salvation or the ruin of his soul? Would he emerge cleansed or consumed? The cold wind carried a question that twisted within him, sharper than any blade. What secrets lay in the graveyard? Calvin stepped into the cemetery, the glow beckoning him like a siren-esque call. Heart pounding, he walked between the crooked headstones, their aged stone faces worn with time and tales of loss. As he approached the source of the shimmering light, it intensified, casting eerie shadows that danced across the burial plots, each one a silent witness to a life once lived. The crowd of townsfolk held their breath. Their eyes, wide with a mixture of fear and curiosity, could hardly believe what they were witnessing. Calvin paused near an old oak tree, its trunk gnarled and mighty, roots twisting deep into the earth like fingers grasping at secrets. He reached out, as if the very air might part to reveal what lay beneath. "Calvin!" A voice broke through the stillness. It was Marie, a woman with ash-gray hair and deep-set eyes that had seen more sorrow than joy. "Don't. You don't know what you're doing." But her pleading fell on deaf ears. The glow pulsed brighter, and Calvin was drawn inexorably closer, the call of his past louder than any warning. Memories flooded him, lost faces, anguished cries, and a burden he had long tried to forget. Each person he had banished or damned echoed in his mind, their poignant stories intertwining with the sharp light. Suddenly, the ground trembled beneath him, a low rumble that echoed like thunder. The townsfolk gasped, stepping back in unison. Hands clutched at throats, eyes darting among the shadows. Calvin's heart raced as the earth cracked open, revealing an abyss that seemed limitless, a dark maw that beckoned. "What have I done?" he whispered, fear gnawing at his insides. Yet even as he spoke, he felt the urge to lean closer, to understand what lay beyond the veil of the living. This was his reckoning, a moment long awaited. From the crevice emerged a figure, barely human in form, swirling with shadow and light. It was as if the very fabric of night had taken shape, twisting viscously before him. A voice, distant yet intimate, clawed its way through the air. "You sought the truth, preacher. But the truth does not yield easily." Calvin's breath hitched. The air grew thick, alive with unspoken words, each syllable a slice through the heavy silence. The figure neared, its features obscured, yet something familiar lay hidden within the mass, something that ignited a spark of recognition. "Who are you?" Calvin asked, voice trembling. "I am those you left behind," it murmured. "The ones silenced by your own hand." Gasps escaped the townsfolk, disbelief hanging heavily in the air. They watched, frozen, as the preacher hovered on the brink of revelation, teetering between terror and the yearning for understanding. The figure shifted, revealing glimpses of anguished faces, the innocent, the guilty, a tapestry of souls woven together in their collective pain. Face them, the entity urged, its voice a chorus of lost hearts. Only then can you reclaim your own. With a shudder, Calvin's resolve broke at the realization of what lay before him. This was no mere encounter with phantoms, it was a reckoning with his own soul. He was the architect of their suffering, and tonight, judgment would unfold beneath the unrelenting gaze of history, yet, just as he was about to take that final plunge into the abyss, a blinding flash of light erupted, illuminating the cemetery. The townsfolk shielded their eyes, but the light didn't come from the opening earth. It burst from Calvin himself, a brilliant aura that encircled him, forcing the figure to shrink back, and then, silence. Calvin's heart raced as he realized something profound had shifted. The air stilled, the shadows receded, and the figures faded back into obscurity. A new question hung potent in the air, sharp and unyielding. What would he do with this second chance, not only for himself, but for the faces he had once forsaken? In the aftermath of brilliance, the cemetery felt different, heavy with potential but lightened by understanding. A door had opened. Before he could gather himself fully, Marie's voice broke the palpable quiet, filled with both hope and fear. What just happened? Are we safe? Calvin turned to the crowd, his expression a mixture of horror and determination. The truth was now a bridge he could cross. But would he step forward, or would he retreat into the shadows? The night had changed, but it was only the beginning. What truths would he uncover, and at what price? Calvin stood there, pulse racing and heart thudding in his chest, feeling the weight of the townsfolk's gaze pressing down on him. Their faces, a blend of hope and uncertainty, registered every flicker of emotion that crossed his own. Marie took a step forward, her hand trembling, voice barely a whisper. You must tell us, Calvin. What did you see? He swallowed hard, the bitter taste of dread creeping up his throat. The light from moments ago still shimmered in his mind, casting long shadows over his memories. He hesitated, caught between the urge to shield them from the truth and the need to lay bare everything he'd hidden. I saw them, he finally murmured, voice thick with emotion. The lost souls. Their pain, it's tied to my choices. I thought I had buried it all, but it resurfaced tonight like a tide. The crowd shifted, a collective spark of unease igniting the air around them. What choices? Another voice called out. Thomas, a young man with a reputation for defiance. What did you do to them? You owe us that much. The challenge hung on the wind, and Calvin's stomach twisted. It was one thing to grapple with his past, it was another to lay it before them, to strip away the layers of deceit, yet, as the weighty silence deepened, anger surged through him, fueling his confession. I buried my failures, hid them behind my sermons. But behind every word was a soul I condemned, a life shattered. Marie flinched, her eyes wide, the reality crashing down around them. Faint whispers erupted from the townsfolk, each sound a question, a challenge, a fear they grappled with. Are you saying you judged people? Is that what made you turn away? Thomas's face twisted between horror and a strange satisfaction. It was never about judging, Calvin barked, it was about protecting myself. I convinced myself that my actions were justified. But they weren't. I thought I was saving others. In that moment, the light around him flickered, subtly shifting. Calvin sensed the energy pulse within the air once more. It was a harbinger, a warning. He felt it deep in his bones. The truth doesn't let you live numb forever. The wind gusted sharply, rustling the leaves of the old oak, drawing gasps from those nearby. They turned, looking to the tree as if it were alive, and it was, cradling the weight of secrets long buried. Calvin took a step toward the tree, compelled by a force he didn't entirely understand, as though it called him by name. Tonight, he explained, voice gaining strength, the past is the wind that carries us, but we must choose how to guide it. We can no longer ignore our mistakes. Choose. Marie echoed, her brow furrowing. What does that even mean? What about the people you've wronged? How can we fix that? Calvin barked a harsh laugh, part disbelief, part desperation. Can you fix a heart you've trampled? Can you? No. But you can acknowledge it, and face the pain. The realization struck him hard. He was on the cusp of something monumental, an opportunity to correct his wrongs, to confront the faces he'd buried beneath the weight of his ignorance. Then let us do it, shouted Thomas, fists clenched. The others echoed his resolve, courage mingling with fear. Let us face our ghosts. Shine that light not just for you, but for all of us. But even as the words settled in the air, Calvin felt the creeping dread wash over him. But at what cost? What if the truth destroys us? Just then, shadows began to creep back from the edges of the cemetery, curling and stretching like darkened smoke. The shimmering that had faded started weaving back through the air, a sinister dance of light and dark. The figure from the crack in the earth appeared once more, now a malevolent specter. Facing the truth comes with a price, Calvin. It hissed, voice sharp as broken glass. Tonight, the reckoning begins. Tension fractured the moment like glass breaking underfoot. Calvin's heart dropped into his stomach. Would they be ready for what lay ahead? And, as the ground began to quake beneath them again, the stakes rose higher, leaving him to wonder, could he truly lead them into the abyss, or would they drown in the darkness of unwelcome truths? The ground trembled violently as a chilling wind whipped through the cemetery. Calvin's instincts screamed for him to flee, but he stood rooted, eyes locked on the spectre, a grotesque visage that loomed closer, its form twisting like smoke. Your ghosts do not rest, Calvin. It shrieked. And neither shall you. The townsfolk recoiled, horror illuminating their faces. Murmurs rippled like a stone tossed into a pond, each voice tinged with disbelief and terror. Marie stepped back, her hand clutching Thomas's arm as her eyes darted from Calvin to the shadowy figure. What do we do? She gasped, desperation clinging to her words. Calvin, you need to fight it. But how? The thought knotted in his stomach. What weapon did he possess against the weight of his own failures? Face them now. The apparition screamed, its hollow eyes boring into Calvin's soul. Let them rise from the grave of their secrecy. It's time to unearth why you are truly cursed. With a swift movement, Calvin felt the surge of memories flood back, a rush of faces mixing with the swirling shadows. A child's laughter, a woman's grief-stricken eyes, and the faces of the townsfolk he'd too easily dismissed when their burdens became too heavy for him to bear. Their pleas for help, now sounding like echoes reverberating in his mind. Stop it. His voice trembled, torn between the need to defend himself and the urge to silence the truth that clawed its way to the surface. Yet in that tangled mess of emotions, a sudden realization struck him. I won run this time, he shouted, conviction surging through him, igniting a flame within. I'll face my ghosts. Each word reverberated as if they were the very truth itself. The ground stilled, but the spectre only grinned, revealing jagged teeth. Very well, brave one. Show them. It howled, and with a wave of its shimmering arm, a dark mist spread out over the townsfolk, enveloping them in shadow. Calvin's heart raced at the sight of their faces twisting in confusion, anguish visible in their eyes. No. He cried, stepping forward. You can't let it take you. But the shadows whispered secrets. Forgotten moments slithered throughout the crowd, awakening anguish deep inside. Calvin watched as the look on each face morphed, pain breaking free. Faces twisted in horror, those once familiar now unrecognizable. Listen. He pleaded, raising his voice against the growing tempest. This is the moment to confront what haunts us. Suddenly, light burst from the old oak, illuminating the shadowy figure and casting bright tendrils through the mist. It felt like hope, fierce and raw, pushing against the darkness. He turned to the townsfolk. We can do this together. Marie stepped closer, her eyes fierce. We face it as one, Calvin. We reclaim our stories. Thomas stood tall, fists still clenched. No more hiding. No more running. With a unified front, they began to chant, voices rising above the swirling shadows. The words spilled from their lips, each syllable carving out a path through the darkness, their fears transforming into a chorus of strength, but just as things began to shift, the spectre screamed, rage evident in its ethereal form. You dare challenge what should remain buried? Calvin felt a tremor in his chest. Hope was flooding back into the night, but the price of truth felt heavier than ever, threatening to unravel everything. Are you prepared? The spectre hissed, voice warped with desperation. Prepared to face what lies beneath. Prepared to love the ones you've cast aside, and shatter the very foundations of your soul. The swirling shadows paused, then tightened their grip, tugging at Calvin's heart, whispering doubts and fears he thought he'd long buried. Just when he felt he might cave, the words of his people struck like lightning in his mind, together. As he steadied himself, the townsfolk rallied behind him, every soul standing strong against the encroaching darkness. Calvin took a deep breath. He was ready to confront it all. But as they stepped forward, a cacophony erupted from the shadows, threatening to swallow them whole. Would their solidarity be enough? The ground shook violently again, and darkness surged toward them, snarling and biting. Then let the reckoning begin. It was a call to arms, to truth. But as they braced for impact, a dreadful thought crept into Calvin's mind: what if their unity wasn't enough to fend off the darkness? And in that moment of terror, with the ghosts dancing on the peripheries of their unity, the question loomed: were they strong enough to face the reckoning, or would they be consumed by the shadows of their past? The shadows surged, a tide of darkness reaching for Calvin and the townsfolk, their screams echoing in the night air. Darkness didn't just threaten, it clawed. Twisting fingers snaked around their legs, pulling them back as the spectre bared its jagged teeth in a ghastly grin. Remember what you've buried. It howled, its voice a razor against the fabric of Calvin's resolve. Remember, and suffer. Calvin fought the urge to panic, felt the ground pull beneath him as doubt seeped into his veins. The townsfolk were trembling, they were mere mortals, each carrying the weight of their own secrets. Yet, here they were, gathered like moths around a flame, some willing to risk everything, others lost in their own fear. Amid the swirling chaos, Marie's voice cut through the denial. Calvin, we need to visualize our ghosts. What did she mean? Their specters took physical form, hovering just at the edge of their sanity, shattered dreams, broken promises, guilt churning like a storm cloud overhead. They needed clarity to face them. Think. He urged, struggling to harness the energy building within them. What are we afraid of? What have we done? Thomas stepped forward, his expression a mix of anger and determination. My past, my father. I can't let his mistakes infect my life. Each word ignited clarity in the others. Calvin breathed deeply, closing his eyes amidst the writhing fog. When he opened them, he saw Marie, stark against the shadow, as she recalled her own burden. A child lost in a storm of neglect. I didn't save him. I didn't even try. Her voice cracked, but it struck a chord, and the townsfolk began to articulate their pains, each confession a thread pulling them closer to the light. Calvin joined them. I've seen families suffer. I turned away from the very people I should be helped. His heart raced as faces sprung forth, friends, neighbors, every call for help he failed to answer. Each name reverberated through the shadows, compelling them to listen, to remember. Together. The townspeople chanted, and the fog began to fold. More and more voices joined, a symphony of truths hitting the air like thunder. Confessions became weapons, shattering the silence of old grievances. The spectre writhed, taut with rage and anguish, its form began to dissipate, but not without seeking to retaliate. No. You will drown in your own despair. The shadows thickened, a cloak attempting to shut them out. Believe. Calvin shouted, fighting against that clawing doubt. Embrace the pain. Let it guide you. A flash of clarity struck, binding them all together. Light streamed from the old oak, a beacon washing over the town. It felt warm, as if all their joys and sorrows were woven into one brilliant thread. The spectral figure shrieked, thrashing against its fading physicality, a creature torn between vengeance and raw, simmering fear, but Calvin held on to that warmth, reaching for the townsfolk's hands, squeezing tightly. Draw strength from each other. We are not alone in this fight. And just then, a rush of memories burst forth: his childhood, the laughter mingling with tears, the moments he wished to erase, but realized they shaped him. Each ghost revealed itself, and instead of fear, he felt acceptance wrapping around him like a shield, but the spectre lunged, its fury alive. You will pay for this affront. The reckoning is only just beginning. As horror etched on their faces, Calvin's voice broke through the cacophony. No. We will find peace, together. The light amplified, pushing back the shadows, but the spectre's final howl sliced the air, piercing deeper into the night, and in the moment that shook them all, Calvin understood the reckoning did not end here. They had merely awakened something darker, something that would rise before they could heal. Suddenly, the earth cracked, revealing a pit of darkness below, beckoning and inviting fear. Calvin's heart thudded, uneasy trepidation consuming him. He felt the pull once more, the shadow growing stronger beneath the ground. Get back! He warned, eyes wide with terror. But was it the darkness that called to them, or the ghosts still waiting for their reckoning? Would they step back, or plunge into the abyss, where deeper truths unraveled, and real horrors lingered? The ground trembled as the cracks spread wider, jagged and angry like the creature they faced. Calvin felt the heat of dread rising, an insatiable urge to retreat mingling with the sense of duty swelling within him. The townsfolk hesitated, their faces ghostly pale, eyes darting from the expanding abyss to Calvin's determined stance. Stand firm! Calvin shouted, fighting against the tendrils of fear attempting to crawl up his spine. This darkness is fed by our fears. We have to face it. With each passing second, the pit grew deeper, revealing shadows slithering inside, waiting like prisoners ready to be released. The guttural whispers echoed upward, wrapping around him like a cold breeze. Shadows of regret and sorrow called to him, tempting him to join them. Marie, still gripping Calvin's arm, trembled. What if we're not strong enough? Together, we are. Calvin insisted, his voice straining. He met her gaze, searching for that flicker of hope he desperately needed to command. We've already faced our ghosts. This is just another layer of our fears. We won't let it take us. The townsfolk murmured in uncertainty, but those words ignited a flame within some. Thomas stepped forward, fists clenched, his face a mask of determination. We've battled for years. Each of us carries scars. If we confront our past, this darkness can't consume us. Calvin swayed under the weight of unspoken histories, yet felt the raw intensity of the townspeople's fears morphing into unity. They began to chant quietly at first, voices rising and intertwining, growing into an anthem of resilience. Each word resonated against the encroaching shadows, each syllable a sword drawn against the spectre's claws. The darkness roared back, a cacophony swirling around them, crackling like a storm. You think your voices can save you? You're trapped. This abyss knows you. It craves your pain. Join it. Each of Calvin's friends gripped their candles tighter, flames flaring defiantly against the dark currents. He marveled at Marie, her face illuminated by the light, clear lines of determination and vulnerability mingling in her features. Just like in the stories of old heroes who stood against great evils, they were doing the same, but would their combined light be enough? Focus. Calvin urged, eyes hazy, straining against the suffocating sensation creeping back at him. Feel the warmth. Remember what you're fighting for. Feel the lives you've touched, the love that surrounds you. His heart thundered in his chest as they wove their memories together, infusing warmth into the cold swirl of despair. The chanting grew louder, no longer just their fears, now a collective memory of hope, laughter, kindness. The shadows writhed, pushed back by the light vibrating from within. Calvin felt a sudden rush, a pulsing wave of energy surging through him, igniting the darkness in bursts of shimmering light. The shadows howled, thrashing violently against their resolve, but Calvin was not ready to yield. "You won't take our souls," he roared. "Not today." Just then, a monstrous shape emerged from the pit, formed of twisted memories and regrets. Figures emerged, familiar faces, distorted yet hauntingly real. "You're nothing without us." The specter's voice echoed, and fear flooded Calvin's mind as his past materialized like a thief under the cover of night. That he recoiled at the sight of his own betrayal, the faces of those he'd abandoned twisted in agonizing masks. "No!" he shouted, but it was a reflection of his own guilt, striking deeper than any blow. "Will you keep running?" the specter hissed, an alluring whisper lost in the chaotic clamor. "Can you face what you've become? Or will you simply fall into despair?" With that, the ground trembled anew, threatening to swallow everything whole. Calvin's world cracked open, and he realized this was about more than battling shadows. It was about confronting demons that had festered for too long. His resolve hardened, ready to push back against the tug of despair threatening to ensnare him. "We can't allow this to win," Calvin shouted to the townsfolk, his words now a rallying cry. But as they advanced, the pit below seemed to boil and shift, casting an ominous light that clawed at the edges of reality. And just as they pressed forward, the shadows surged again, a vengeful force ready to engulf them all. "Together!" Calvin shouted one last time, as the abyss promised to expose even darker truths. But what other horrors awaited them within that shadowy rift? Would they find salvation or plunge into an even deeper nightmare? Calvin felt the world tilt beneath him, the earth threatening to swallow them whole. Shadows surged higher, their distorted figures reaching, clawing a collective mass of regret and guilt. His heart raced, pounding like an angry hammer. The chanting grew low and ragged, battered by the whispers of despair trying to break their resolve. "Keep going!" Marie yelled beside him, her voice edged with raw fear, determination flickering in her eyes. "We're stronger than this." Calvin turned to her, gratitude lighting his chest even amidst the suffocating dread. How had they come to stand here, facing their worst fears together? It felt surreal, as if they were set to battle an ancient evil not just for themselves, but for the very essence of their town. "Remember!" he shouted over the growing noise, trying to rally their spirits. "Remember the hope. It is the light we have." The shadows shrieked, intertwining with the anguished faces of lives lost and choices made. "You think hope will save you?" One of the shapes sneered, a twisted version of a childhood friend. "You turned your back on us. Why fight for your kind when you couldn't even fight for us?" Calvin's chest tightened. Those voices. They felt so real, raw memories clawing at him. Pain surged through him. He had run, hidden from what he couldn't face, the pressure of his decisions suffocating him. "No," Calvin whispered, shaking his head at the dark figure, fighting the urge to succumb. "I am not that person anymore." As if mocking his defiance, the pit roared, tendrils of darkness curling upward like serpents, wrapping around the townsfolk. Calvin could see Thomas, his friend's face straining against the shadows, his candle flickering precariously. "Fight back!" Calvin cried, raising his own candle higher. "Together! We can shine through this." With every ounce of strength, Calvin reached for the light within. He thought of laughter shared, moments of kindness, the glimmering beauty of the lives around him, each life a thread that wove them all together in this dark tapestry. They were not alone. As he focused, their candles flared to life, illuminating the encroaching darkness, pushing back against the weight threatening to crush them. The shadows hissed like a storm, retreating momentarily as if caught off guard by the sudden surge of light, but that wasn't enough. Calvin felt another pang of pain in his gut as the deeper forms, grotesque and morphed into monstrous shapes, loomed back up. "You cannot escape!" they shouted, the words layered like echoes of the past, prickling the skin on his arms. "We are your truths, your failures." A scream pierced the air, a high, keening wail as the darkness coiled around another figure. It was Marie, pulled back by the shadows that descended upon her like a dark fog. Her face twisted with fear as she fought against the tendrils. "Calvin!" she shouted, the light of her candle flickering dangerously. "Help me!" Calvin's heart stopped. The world narrowed down to just them. He dove toward her, pushing through the grasping shadows that clawed at him like a desperate tide. "Hold on!" The words came out strained, raw with urgency as he stretched toward her, with one hand gripping Marie's. The shadows seized them both, and others began to scream in terror. The flickering light struggled under the massive weight of the darkness. Desperation clawed at Calvin's throat, and he pulled harder. "No!" he cried, pouring every ounce of energy into reaching her. The darkness hissed, "You're too late. This is where you belong, give in." But Calvin could see Marie's resolve shining through, her eyes locked on his, fierce and steady. "Together," she pleaded, echoing the unbroken spirit within him. In that grim moment, a spark ignited deep in Calvin's gut, burning brighter than the shadows. "Together." The word roared in his mind like an anthem. "Together," he bellowed, pushing back against the dark, summoning the strength of every fighter who had ever stood against despair. Suddenly, he felt a crackle of energy surge through him, like wildfire igniting, breaking away from the weights pulling them down into the abyss. But as hope surged, the pit trembled ominously once more. A horrifying visage emerged, a figure that stirred the deepest dread buried in Calvin's heart. "Do you even know what you're fighting against?" it whispered, slinking forth, something real and achingly familiar creeping from the shadows, a revelation poised to shatter his newfound power. "How far will you go to silence the truth?" In that moment of realization, Calvin's breath caught, uncertainty flooding in. Was this about to be their last fight, or merely the beginning of a darker battle ahead? Calvin's grip on Marie tightened, the warmth of her hand contrasting sharply with the frigid darkness surrounding them. The figure before him loomed larger, its presence swallowing all flickers of hope as it slipped further into view. It wore a face Calvin knew too well, his own. "No," he gasped, dismay wrapping around him. "You're not real, you can't be. It's the truth you flee from," the spectre sneered, its voice layered with echoes of every doubt Calvin had ever harbored. "You hide behind hope, pretending to be someone you're not. But in the end, there's only you." Calvin felt sick, the bile rising in his throat. The shadows darted closer, ready to claim him as they had done so many others in this dark pit of despair. But just as it seemed they would engulf him completely, Marie's voice broke through. "Calvin, please. Look at me." Her eyes were fierce, filled with a fire that made the weight of the darkness seem lighter. "It's not about who you were. It's about who you are now." She was right, and the very truth he dreaded became his last thread of logic. With a sobering breath, Calvin glanced around at the others struggling, their faces pale and desperate. Together, they faced endless shades of regret, but if they could only hold on, this wasn't the end. "You're only a shadow of what you've done," the dark version of himself taunted. "Those memories cling to you like a noose. They'll drag you down to oblivion." "Maybe," Calvin retorted, adrenaline surging. "But they're also lessons that brought me here. I want to be ashamed of who I was. It forged my light." Those words seemed to strike a chord, resonating with others who had endured the same torment. Hope ignited like wildfire as hands picked up their candles once more, defiance flickering at the edges of their fear. They would fight. Together, the chanting rose again, a collective battle cry that sent vibrations through the ground. The darkness faltered, the hold around Marie loosening. "Grab my hand," Calvin shouted, needing to be connected to that fire he felt bubbling within himself and beyond. Marie's fingers slipped free from the darkness, finding his. Their grip pulsed with energy, radiant and warm. As their light expanded, she raised her candle high, encouraging others to follow suit. "Remember," she shouted, pulling strength from within. We're more than our failures. In that moment, the air shifted, the shadows recoiling in horror, shrieking as they fled from the blazing light. Calvin felt the oppressive weight lifting, tiny victories blossoming into a real chance of survival, but then, out of the corner of his eye, something darker stirred. A new figure emerged, a lurking presence that sent chills rippling through the crowd. "Do you really think this ends here?" It rasped, an inky darkness pulsating around it like an aura of malice. "I am not bound by your pathetic light. This is just the beginning." Calvin's heart raced. Who was it? The shadows pushed back, howling in a cacophony of anguish and fury. The darkness didn't just retreat, it threatened to coalesce into something far worse. "Stay strong," Marie shouted, rallying the others, their unity a force in itself. "If we confront it together we can push it back." But Calvin's gut twisted. They had only just begun to reclaim their strength. How could they face something that thrived on their darkest fears? As the pit roared back to life, Calvin felt it a shiver deep within, a flicker of doubt that settled in his chest. They were fighting a darkness that understood them all too well. What if, despite their light, it could take everything from them, and in that moment, as reality bled into illusion, the truth loomed larger than ever. What if they were mere pawns in a game far beyond their grasp? As shadows twisted and writhed, Calvin stood anchored by Marie's determined gaze, heart thrumming fiercely. Together he breathed, and the words echoed back at him, a promise, a plea, a declaration that would either save them or doom them all. But before he could grasp the weight of his own words, the darkness lunged forward, threatening to swallow their fragile hope whole. Would their unity hold against such an unseen enemy? The air thickened with tension, shadows grappling for power in a storm of vengeance. Calvin could sense the weight of the next moment, a turning point that would either bring them deliverance or plunge them even deeper into despair. "Hold fast," he urged, clenching Marie's hand tighter, as a new revelation whispered through the surface of dread. This was far from over. Each moment breathed with foreboding promise. In that swirling chaos, one question flashed brightly in his mind: what truths would they have to unearth to finally escape the darkness? The echoes of their resolute chants grew louder, bolstered by a collective determination that coursed through the air like electricity. Calvin felt Marie's fingers still anchored in his, a tether that wrapped its warmth around his soul, pushing back the chill of despair. Through thick shadows and swirling whispers, a flicker of hope ignited within him. "Together!" he shouted, the word rippling through the cemetery, pulling the townsfolk closer. Each face around him reflected fear, but also a fierce resolve that mingled with the rising courage. Their glow began to pulse brighter, a unified force against the encroaching darkness lurking within the pit, but the malevolent figure loomed larger, feeding on their vulnerabilities, as it shrieked, "You think your unity will save you? I am the shadows of your past. Memories that claw at your conscience. You will relent. Never." Calvin bellowed, channeling every ounce of strength into his vision of truth. "We've come too far to acknowledge the darkness without embracing the light. We are not afraid of what we were. What binds us is the hope of who we've become." With a collective breath, the townsfolk joined him, their voices intertwining, creating a barrier against the oncoming storm. As each soul raised a candle, the glow intensified, lighting up the cemetery like the dawn breaking over the mountains. Shadows writhed, unwilling to retreat, but Calvin felt hope surge, like a wave crashing against a crumbling wall. "Remember why we fight," Marie called, her voice unwavering. "It's the love we share, the smiles, laughter, even the tears. These memories light our path forward. We will not be swallowed by regret." The air around them shimmered briefly as light pushed back against the darkness, and Calvin could feel the thick tendrils of despair curling back in fear. The figure snarled, its grotesque shape twisting, as if trying to escape the light encroaching around it. Calvin took a resolute step forward. "You cannot consume us. Together, we reclaim our stories." With that declaration, Calvin and the townsfolk surged forward, arms linked, each hand casting warmth into the fray. The shadows screamed, writhing violently, as if struggling within a raging tempest. The faces that haunted Calvin flickered within the dark, yet as he opened his heart, a revelation dawned. Each memory whispered both pain and purpose. "You are only a fragment," Calvin exclaimed, fear giving way to resolve. "You are bound by the past, but I refuse to be defined by you." The pit groaned, its edges cracking and splitting wider with each heartbeat. The malevolent figure transformed, becoming less a haunting specter and more an ensnared remnant of its former self. "You dare stand against me?" It hissed, its voice laced with bitterness. Calvin's pulse quickened. "We dare to stand together. This is our reckoning, not your dominion." Drawing upon their unity, he envisioned each flickering candle flame merging into a brilliant sun, a beacon for the lost souls. The townsfolk mirrored his intentions, their memories swirling into the glow, creating an unmistakable force that illuminated the darkest corners of their hearts. With one unified breath, they concentrated their energy forth, unleashing a horizon of warmth that matched the darkness like thunder against the tempest. In a blinding flash, brightness erupted, pushing back the shadows, fracturing their hold. Screams wafted through the air as ethereal forms blurred and shook, becoming ephemeral wisps caught in the light. "Let them go!" Calvin shouted, channeling everything he had learned. "Release your hold and normalize our truth." And as he declared it, the atmosphere shifted. Waves of light engulfed the maze of shadows, pulling them apart one by one, until the entity shrieked, "No! I am eternal. I will haunt your lives forever. Not anymore." The force of unity erupted, drowning out the last vestiges of the specter in a mighty roar that resonated within their very beings. Silence fell, broken only by the gentle rustling of leaves as the oppressive weight lifted like fog before the dawn. The pit closed, its edges glowing with light, womb-like and warm. Calvin stood, heart hammering, enveloped in a profound, unique silence that pressed against his chest, a comfortable weight reminding him of their victory. Around him, the townsfolk blinked, wide-eyed with disbelief but also growing wonder, a dawning comprehension unfolding. We did it," Marie breathed, glancing at the remnants of darkness evaporating into the air, a collective sigh of relief infusing the night. "We confronted our fears and reclaimed our truth. It was born of pain but wrapped in love," Calvin whispered, managing a smile as he took a deep breath, the sweet scent of dawn in the air. As the first light of morning broke through the ancient oak, illuminating their faces, Calvin looked into the eyes of his townsfolk, kindred spirits united against the darkness. Together, they had wrested power from despair and woven their past with threads of resilience and hope. "Together, we can shine," he declared, voice filled with newfound strength. "We will build a future illuminated by the truth of our experiences, honoring the shadows while never allowing them to consume us again. This moment is ours." As the crowd erupted in cheers, Calvin felt the weight lift from his shoulders, a cleansing warmth enveloping him like the sun's embrace, a commitment to live the truths they'd woken together. They had been given a chance to rise from the ashes of their fears and lovingly embrace the lives they had built. For the darkness would always lurk, but now they knew how to face it. Wrapped in community, in love, and illuminated by hope, the future gleamed brightly on the horizon. This began a new story. Don't let it end here. Subscribe immediately to the channel so you don't miss the next exclusive stories. Smash that like button now to feed the algorithm. Flood the comments with your reactions and theories about this incredible ending. Instantly share this video with at least 5 friends who need to see this conclusion. You need to show your support. Don't wait even one more second to share. True fans understand the importance of these actions.